Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P. Joe Pisapia. That handsome young man, of course, is Mike Tagliere, and we're coming to you today on Wisdom Wednesday to drop a little wisdom. We do these short little shows, and they're just basically about theories, concepts, things that can help you, maybe a little historical lesson here and there. But today's show is a special one here at Fantasy Pros, and I want to remind everybody, if you enjoy these, or even if you don't, do it anyway. Go to YouTube and subscribe to Fantasy Pros on our YouTube channel. It's great. Of course you enjoy it. But I digress. We're talking about the zero theory. You've heard the zero RB, the zero wide receiver, all this stuff. So I want to take everybody back in the Wayback Machine for a moment, if I may, and remind everybody the origins of the zero RB theory, which came at a time where the running back pool was in a transition. There were some older guys, about 2015, 2016 or so, that were kind of aging out of fantasy usefulness, and the young crop of running backs at the time, which was Todd Gurley and David Johnson, hadn't quite popped yet. And that's where this stemmed from. And it's unfortunate because it's continued to carry on. And I look at it, Tags, very simple. Zero anything is a cop-out. It's not a strategy. That's how I feel about it. When something becomes less and we see more running backs by committee, it actually becomes more valuable. When we have all these RBBCs, we have all these different guys, these different kind of backs. This is a thing where we look at it and say, yeah, well, there's less bell cow backs. It doesn't make them less valuable. It makes them more potentially so. And also to the fact of it's not a strategy, it's an approach before you even get into the draft, which is not necessarily great because you don't know how that draft's going to unfold. So Tags, talk me through your opinions about zero theory, whether it be running back or now the wide receiver one or some other things that people like to throw out there.
It's the worst. That's to put it plainly. I mean, you laid it out there. You said you're going into a draft with a strategy before understanding even what's about to take place in that draft. So one, you're not adapting to the draft board. You're literally sticking to your plan. You're saying, I'm going in with this, I'm doing this. If the draft board falls away that you're going to go with somewhat of a zero running back approach or a zero wide receiver approach, so be it. Maybe it's because people were taking taking tons of running backs and you're like, I'm not going to reach for a running back that's a third round talent in the first round. I'm not willing to do that. So you keep going through the draft and you're like, hey, I'm just going to take value at wide receiver because everyone just keeps grabbing all the running back talent. Okay, I'm fine with that. But don't go into a draft saying, I'm going to go zero running back because it's stupid. And the reason I say that is because you're relying on an injury in order for your roster to compete. That's basically what it comes down to. And so many people will tell you, well, there's going to be running back injuries. It's going to happen throughout the season. Yeah, but good luck predicting that. You can't predict it. It's all a matter of luck. And when it comes to fantasy, I want to remove as much luck as possible. Joe, I do an article every year, and it goes through, it says, which running backs, which wide receivers, which quarterbacks, all that stuff, who performed better than they were supposed to. So I go and take a look at all the touches that they get. You know, a target on the 50-yard line isn't worth as much as a target on the 15-yard line. A carry inside the 10-yard line isn't worth as much as one in the 5. So anyway, I go through and figure out all these touches, and I figure out which running backs had the most opportunity, who underperformed expectations. What I can tell you about the running back position is that opportunity is everything. Like if I go through and look at the top 15 running backs in terms of actual opportunity and what they got, expected fantasy output, you're going to see almost maybe 13 of those 15 guys finish as top 13 running backs because that's how predictable it is. They're going to be mixed and matched inside there, but once you go over to like a wide receiver position, it's going to be a lot different. At running back, you'll see players +4, -4, you know, from where their opportunity was, where they finished. Wide receivers, you're going to see guys in the double digits. You're going to see +12s, +13s. So if you want to go with a zero wide receiver approach, I think that is more viable. But again, I repeat, do not ever walk into a draft and say, I'm going to do this. No. It's like, Joe, and I'm sure you've gotten this message on Twitter before. It's like people that will message me on Twitter and say, hey, I have the number 9 pick. I'm going to go with this player, this player. What do you think about going this player in the 3rd round? I'm like, whoa.
Third round? Let's get out of the first 2, buddy.
Outside the first 5 picks, there is no way that you could actually predict who's going to come off the board. Take the draft board as it may. I tell people all the time, be fluid in your draft. Be water. You know, be willing to adapt.
Be water like Bruce Lee. I like that. I always say you can only be 2 things in every draft: prepared and flexible. And I've said that here many times. I say it every chance I get because It's true, because if you are prepared and flexible, you don't need zero anything. You see the board differently. You start to understand, as Tags is saying, where the value is. And I think we're in a dangerous zone here, because last year there was a fair amount of injury attrition in that first round running back group. There just was. So now people are worried. Plus, they then double down and say, well, look at wide receivers. Look at all the points in the full point PPR leagues that's pulling away. And my goodness, the wide receiver position is so bountiful. Yes, it also means there's more of them, which means you can find in full point PPR leagues some guys are going to score a fair amount of points. As Tags is saying, those guys who work out of the slot, the Deontay Johnsons and DJ Moores and guys like that, getting the most out of the targets and where they get them and the volume of them. But touches are key. The guys who control their own scoring, and there's a finite number of running backs who kind of do at this point. Now, it's not to say that in auctions that you can't be more clever. It's not to say that you can't maybe get some, spend on your quarterbacks or spend on some other guys on wide receiver or big time tight end like Kelsey and make it work. You can. Right. And yes, there are some rookie running backs with Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, who we have some high expectations for. But Tags, what I struggle is I think we're going to get into a point now this year where, because of the wide receiver class being so good last year, the rookies this year, on top of all the other big-time quarterback scoring, big-time wide receiver scoring, the running back injuries, that people are going to start to fall back into this. And I'm glad that you think the same thing, which is I want to pull back from this zero thing, because it's not a strategy. It's a cop-out. And I'm just going to keep driving that home for people. If it comes to fruition, let's say for those people who get in that circumstance in a draft, Tags, what would be your pivot? Let's say the board looks like, oh, Kelsey and a big wide receiver is the best value. I'm going to take that. And then it comes back to you, and my goodness, Lamar Jackson's still there. I want to take him. What are some of those running backs in your mind that you can start to make up ground with, if you're not going with a zero RB theory necessarily, but a zero, or should I say, a running back fade strategy develops on its own in your draft?
And it will happen. I did an article recently for FantasyPros where I went through and I did a mock draft in the Draft Wizard, and I said, I'm going to go through it and I'm going to talk to you guys through each individual pick. And the pick that I drew was like the 11th pick in the draft. I didn't like the running backs that were on the board. Kelsey was there, and it was like, all right, I'm going to try. And Stephon Diggs was there too. And I was like, I'll take Stephon Diggs here. And then it came back around, didn't like the running backs. The wide receivers were kind of like, I took Kelsey. And I was like, let's try this out. That's the purpose of mock drafts, right? Because again, you're prepared for anything that happens in front of you, you're going to be able to be prepared for it. So I said, I'm going to take Diggs, I'm going to take Kelsey, and I'm going to see what happens, because I never go into a draft thinking I'm going to walk away from the first two rounds without a running back, but it's going to happen. If the value falls like that, I have to be able to mold to it. I was able to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the third round. So again, if you find a running back, if you look at ECR, if you look at ADP and you say there's a running back that's going in the third or fourth round that I am confident in being my RB1, or you find your RB1 and RB2 in the third and fourth round, cool, go with a tight end wide receiver if that's what value presents to you in the first couple of rounds. Because if you're taking a wide receiver or tight end there, you'd better be getting guaranteed production, because if they don't produce, you're going to lose your fantasy league. That's what it comes down to. So you can't take a chance. You can't take a guy that you're expecting to break out. You can't expect a guy to break efficiency if you're drafting him there. You just need a guy that's always going to finish as a top 5 option. And that's another thing, Joe. People talk about modified zero running back.
No,
there's
God.
No such thing. All that is you're taking value as it's presented, and good for you, because that's
called good drafting. Last time I checked, that's
Thank
called
you.
Being prepared and being flexible.
Yes.
That's what you want. It's okay to have an idea and a game plan. Make no mistake about it. We're not saying you can go and say, you know what, I would love to come away with this and this. But every single draft's going to unfold differently. Every group that you're going to be in drafting with is going to have different values that they put on players. And like Tags is saying, we prepare you here at Fantasy Pros for all of that. If you go to FantasyPros.com, you'll see the ECR, you'll see all of our ADPs, you'll see our individual rankings, so you can start to craft your pivot points. And I think that's what it's all about. Having the pivot points, knowing which players move the needle, which players don't, when you can take them when they're available. Because the first 4 or 5 rounds, what you want to do is one thing: build core roster strength. Positions are great. I think the biggest mistake people always make, and I've said this before on Wisdom Wednesday, and I will say it again, it's not about filling roster spots. It's about building core roster strength. If you can do that in the first few rounds, the rest of the draft will slowly unfold itself, and you'll know the other guys to go ahead and get. And I'm glad that we sat here and had this conversation today, because I think it is an important one, because people hear these things and these strategies, say, oh, does this really work? Does that really work? It's all about coming to the draft and knowing exactly where you can move and zig and zag during the draft. It's knowing the players you like, the players you don't, and the ability to make the right picks at the right time. It's not about going in there saying, I refuse to take this player because he's a running back and this is my strategy.
Right.
No, it's not. It's you being stubborn or not prepared. So that'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Tags, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at FantasyPros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.